Number 1. The Old House. I used to get into a lot of fights with my stepmother. Things were pretty crappy at home ever since she married my dad. I asked my mom if I could come and stay with her, but she was too busy for me. It sucked. Things just got more and more difficult, and it eventually came to a head when my stepmom accused me of stealing something from her, which I hadn't. Of course, my dad believed her over me, and we got into a huge fight. I couldn't take it anymore, and after they went to sleep, I packed a duffel bag and the little bit of money I had, and I left. For a couple of nights, I was able to sleep at friends' houses. But I was only 16, so that didn't last very long. After about 4 or 5 nights, I was faced with the reality of sleeping on the streets. It scared me, but not enough to make me go home. My first night on the streets was probably worse than you could imagine it being. It was a nightmare, and I didn't really sleep. I tried sleeping at the train station, but the doors were locked. So I slept outside. I felt myself drift off a few times, but I didn't really sleep. I had a little money, so the next day I took the train to the city. I figured there would be more places to sleep there. I was right. The following night I found myself an alley, and I curled up next to a garbage can. I actually managed to sleep for a while, before I felt someone tap me and wake me up. I jumped and grabbed my bag. It was a girl, who also looked homeless. But she was nice, actually, and told me there was a place people were squatting. She asked if I wanted to go, and although I was scared at first, I realized it might be better to get some sleep, so I went with her. There were a lot of people squatting in this old house. It was weird. People were grouped together in circles talking. I really didn't know how much more comfortable I was going to be there. But she took me into a room that only 2 other guys were with, and she knew them. They all welcomed me and wanted to know if I wanted to hang out, and I found out a few minutes later, shoot heroin with them. I let them know I was really only interested in sleeping. I was so tired, that the heroin thing didn't even bother me. I figured I wasn't doing it, so it was no big deal. I went to the corner, and for a little bit, I actually watched what they were doing. I was tired, yeah, but I guess I was also scared and curious. They all did it, and it was hard to watch, especially when the girl did it. I mean, she may have been cute, but she was kinda dirty and stuff. But I liked her because she helped me, so watching her shoot that stuff was really hard. Well, after a while, I actually dozed off, and I later felt someone up against me. I opened my eyes and it was her. She smiled, and I did too, and I closed my eyes. She rubbed my pants a little bit, but we were both too out of it to do anything. I fell asleep again. Later on, I felt someone doing some stuff with my arm. It was annoying, but I thought it was the girl, and I tried to keep asleep. I woke up completely, though, when I felt some pain on my arm. Opening my eyes, I saw a much older man that I hadn't seen before, right in my face. He had pulled my shirt sleeve up and put some sort of band on my arm. It only took me a few moments to realize this guy was going to shoot me up with heroin. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed, trying to pull my arm away from him. "I'm going to kill you, like you killed her," he said, motioning towards the girl. I looked at the girl, and she was laying with her head lolled against the wall, but she was clearly breathing and clearly fine. I pointed out that she was alive, but the guy still had a hold of my arm. Most of what was happening was a blur. I don't even know if he had a needle or had it ready or what, but I resisted and eventually got a good kick on the guy and he let me go. I had a bag and I ran out of the house and I kept running until I found a place I could rest until morning. The following day I found a shelter for runaway teens and I stayed there for as long as they would let me. It was a long time. No happy ending here where I go back to my parents. That never happened. I didn't see my parents again for years, actually. I lived in shelters. Eventually got a job and an apartment and made something with my life, though. Number 2. The Figure. Things got really bad after my dad died. My mom fell into a depression for years. She ended up marrying an awful guy who just used her and hated us kids. It sucked because she would have never, ever even gave a guy like him the time of day beforehand. Things got really rough for me and my brothers and sisters. As the oldest, I did the best to try and protect the others, but it really didn't work. When I was 15, my stepdad hit my younger brother, and he and I got into a fist fight. My mom took his side when she came home from work, though, and she kicked me out of the house. I literally had nowhere to go. We had moved a lot of times after my dad passed away, and I really didn't have any good friends. We didn't have any family nearby either. We lived out in the country, so it wasn't like there were shelters or anything. I spent a couple days wandering around in the hills, actually. It was the only thing I could think of to do. There were abandoned buildings I found that I could sleep in. There were plenty of creeks with fresh water to drink. And this was in the late spring, so there were apple trees that I could steal apples from. You might be surprised about how I didn't run into any people in such a long time. Hell, it was surprising to me, but there were tons of hills, and it went on and on, but it was still hell. I had to sleep with a small blanket I had packed up, and I used my jacket for a pillow. Plus, I slept on the floors of these abandoned little sheds, or whatever they were, and all the time worried someone was going to catch me. One evening, I was sitting back in the small building reading a book, by flashlight. While I was, I heard a strange sound, like a man or something howling. I got up and looked out the window on the door of the shed. It was so dark outside, but I did see the shadowy figure of someone standing about 50 yards from the shed. I quickly turned off my flashlight. I had a padlock on the door, because I brought one with me for safety. When I had got kicked out, my plan was pretty much to sleep in these sheds because I knew about them, so I brought the padlock. I watched the man from inside the shed, and he was walking around, but mostly in my direction. This shed was old, and you could tell no one had used it in decades. But it looked like this guy was coming towards it. He also had something in his hand. It was long, but I couldn't tell what it was. It could have been a gun, or a knife, or who knows what. When I realized the guy was coming towards the shed, I did the only thing I could do. I took my blanket and went over to the furthest corner of the shed and hid completely under the blanket. I hoped in the dark he would not be able to see me. I was too afraid to look out of my blanket to see if he was there. It felt like a lot of time passed, and I almost looked out from behind the blanket. But then suddenly, I heard some sounds, as if someone was trying to open the door. Then he began pulling hard, and I heard the lock jiggling hard. I began to get very scared. It was worse, though, when the guy began pounding on the freaking door. I almost crapped my pants. As the man began pounding on the door, he then began yelling stuff, and it was all gibberish or in a language I did not understand. I was scared and shivering. Whatever he was saying, he was angry. After a while, he stopped pounding, and then it was clear he was kicking on the door. He began yelling again, and then I heard a gunshot. I also heard an awful sound that I later found out was the bullet going through the wood of the door. He shut the door several more times, and I was crying in the shed, but hoping he couldn't hear me. Not long after the shots, the guy stopped pounding on the door. I was damn impressed with how strong it was, but that came later. After he stopped pounding on the door, he must have walked away because it got quiet. I waited there for what seemed like hours, and it might have been hours. I doubted the guy was the owner of the land the shed was on. Why would the guy be out in the middle of the night? He may have just been some crazy hermit guy or something. Whatever he was, it was scary. When I finally had the nerve to crawl out, I looked out the window and no one was there. Although I was terrified, I stayed in the shed for the rest of the night. The following day, I went home. Turns out my mom had been looking for me because her husband had hit one of my other siblings while I was out. She then had realized that he was lying and kicked him out. I can't lie to you. It was hard to forgive her still, but I eventually did. And I was happy to be home, too. Number 3. My friend. There was a time when I left home as a teenager. I don't want to get into the reasons too much. It was a nasty time. My parents seemed pretty nasty to me, but looking back, it was probably as much my fault too. I was a bit of a jerk. Anyway, we got into a big fight and I just told them I was going to leave. They said fine, and I just did. I thought everything would be fine. I went to live with a guy named Chaz. He was a pretty cool guy and all. He lived alone with his father, who was barely ever home. Seemed ideal to me. They lived out in a rural area in a beautiful home. We knew each other pretty well, and he let me crash on his bedroom floor. And that was fine with me. I didn't really know much about Chaz's father. And what was stranger was that Chaz really didn't tell me much. I even asked him one time what his dad did for a living, and he basically said he didn't know. I found that odd, but he said they really didn't spend much time together. Chaz told me that he pretty much raised himself. His dad gave him money whenever he needed anything, and that was pretty much that. I ended up having as little interaction with his father as he seemed to. I had been there for a good 2 months before I had a really freaky experience. Chaz and I were up late watching movies in the living room. His dad came home in a bit of a huff and slammed the door. I was a little afraid the way the man was walking around. I thought he might be angry with us, but he just left the room. When the man came back, I almost shit myself. He was carrying some sort of semi-automatic rifle with him. He told us in an angry voice to either go to Chaz's room or just to stay away from the windows. I wanted to run off to Chaz's room, but he didn't want to go. The old man went out to the front door and locked it. I kept watching him, pacing in front of the house. After a while, I saw the lights of what seemed like several pickup trucks pull up to the house. The lights came in through the living room window and nearly blinded me. I asked Chaz if we should get the hell out of there, and he simply told me not to worry about it. This had happened before, and it was likely not going to turn into anything. I heard Chaz's dad yelling some things at the guys in the trucks. I heard them yelling back at him. I couldn't really understand what any of them were saying, though. I took Chaz's word that this wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't easy to do that, really. It was a bit harder when I heard a few gunshots go off. After a few seconds, a few others went off. I jumped up, but Chaz told me to sit down. He said they were just warning shots and that I shouldn't get so uppity. He said again it happens all the time. A couple moments later, there were more gunshots. But apparently, those were just shots in the air or something. I didn't hear the shots hit anything, and no one seemed to have been shot. Chaz was eerily calm throughout this entire thing. That was probably what was the most unnerving to me. His dad was obviously out in the front yard, having some sort of armed standoff with several guys in pickup trucks. And he just sat there, eating popcorn and watching the movie. I don't really have words for how scary this was. There were a few more gunshots, and eventually the trucks left. Chaz's dad came back in the house with his gun. He didn't say anything to either of us. He just walked into the basement, and that was the last time I saw him all night. I asked Chaz to explain to me what happened, and he seemed really disinterested. All he would tell me is that his dad worked with some guys, and they often had clashes like this. He said it wasn't unusual, and no one ever got shot or hurt or anything. He told me to just ignore it the next time it happened. Well, I ended up staying with Chaz for a long time, and this incident did repeat itself several times. They never told me exactly what was going on, but as weird as it seems, as it went on, I really did start to become more like Chaz, and just ignored the situation. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. First I want to let you know that I'll be doing a live stream on Wednesday night with Hitchhiker at 7 p.m. US Central Time on my channel. I really haven't done something like this before on my own, and Hitch has done this plenty of times, so he'll be giving me a hand. I'm still trying to master this schedule thing, obviously, as we're seeing. This is my Tuesday video, but it's coming out very early Wednesday morning. I'll eventually get the time down, and I appreciate everyone's patience. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please use the button below, or the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this video. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you thought, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on both Facebook and Twitter. I hope you're all having a great week, and don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.